Chapter 50, Equal Ground. The mirror didn't lie, but it didn't tell the whole story either. I stood in the dressing room of the penthouse, staring at the woman in the reflection. I was wearing a gown of liquid gold, silk that clung to my body like a second skin, draped over one shoulder and pooling at my feet. It was bold, expensive, and unapologetic. On my vanity lay the original emerald dress I had worn that first night. It looked small now, faded, like a costume from a life I no longer lived. "You're doing it again," a low, familiar voice rumbled. I looked in the mirror to see Alexander leaning against the doorway. He was in a tuxedo, the black wool stark against his white shirt. He looked every bit the man who owned the room, but the way he looked at me was different. There was no calculation in his eyes. There was only a raw, terrifyingly honest adoration. "I'm just remembering how it felt," I said, turning to face him. "To walk into that ballroom with nothing but a highlighted contract and a heart full of hate." And now, he walked toward me, the sound of his dress shoes rhythmic on the hardwood. He stopped just inches away, his scent, sandalwood and a hint of the crisp New York evening, wrapping around me. "Now I'm walking in as the woman who owns the building," I said, reaching up to adjust his bow tie. "And the man who built it." Alexander caught my hand, his thumb tracing the gold band on my finger. "We're on equal ground now, Maya, truly. But the people in that room tonight, they won't see it that way. They'll look for the leash. They'll look for the moment you look to me for permission." "Then let's give them a masterclass in disappointment," I whispered. He leaned down and kissed me, a lingering, grounding touch. "I'm your consultant tonight, remember. I take my cues from you." "I like the sound of that," I said, pulling him toward the door. "But don't get too comfortable in the shadows, Alexander. A partner stands in the light." Alexander POV. The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Plaza, now the Sterling Blackwood Center, was a sea of diamonds and shark smiles. As we stepped out of the private elevator, the atmosphere in the foyer didn't just shift, it crystallized. Every head turned. Every conversation stuttered. It was the same magnetic pull I had felt my entire life, but this time I wasn't the magnet. Maya was. She walked with a grace that was more than just poise, it was authority. She didn't look for the cameras, yet every lens in the room was trained on her. She didn't seek out the power players, yet the CEOs and senators were already gravitating toward her orbit. I stayed half a step behind her, my hand resting lightly on the small of her back. I could feel the heat of her skin through the gold silk, a constant reminder of the fire we had survived. Alexander, a moment. I turned to see Julian Vane's successor, a man named Holloway. He was young, ambitious, and currently looking at me as if I were a retired athlete, a relic of a former glory. "Holloway," I said, my voice cool and professional. "I hear the foundation is looking for a secondary logistics partner for the European rollout," Holloway said, his eyes flicking to Maya before returning to me. "I'd love to discuss terms, man to man." The slight was subtle, but it was there. He was bypassing the CEO to talk to the Titan. I felt Maya stiffen slightly under my hand, but before I could speak, she turned. She didn't look angry. She looked amused. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice a clear, melodic bell that carried over the orchestra. "I believe your firm specializes in cold chain distribution. It's an impressive operation. But our ethics mandate requires a carbon-neutral footprint for all secondary partners. Does Vanguard have the infrastructure to meet a zero-emission requirement by Q3? Holloway blinked. He hadn't expected the girl to know his ledger. "Well, we're working on a transition." "Then you should work on a proposal," Maya interrupted, stepping into his personal space. "And you can send it to my chief of staff. Man to woman, Mr. Holloway, or CEO to CEO, whichever makes you feel more comfortable." She didn't wait for his response. She turned back to the room, pulling me with her. "Equal ground," I murmured into her ear as we moved toward the center of the floor. "He tried to lock me out of the conversation," she whispered back. "He forgot who wrote the code." I don't think he'll make that mistake again. For the next hour, I watched her on the room. She was brilliant. She was lethal. She handled the board members with the precision of a surgeon and the press with the charm of a diplomat. I found myself standing in groups of men who used to fear me, and all they wanted to talk about was her. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't jealous of the attention. I was intoxicated by it. Watching Maya Sterling rise wasn't just a victory for her legacy, it was a liberation for me. I didn't have to be the wall anymore. I didn't have to be the one who held the room still. I could just be the man who loved the woman who did. Maya POV. The gala was a triumph, but the real battle happened in the shadows. Around 10:00 p.m., I slipped away to the private library on the mezzanine level. I needed 5 minutes of silence, 5 minutes to stop being the queen of tech and just breathe. The library was dim, filled with the scent of old leather and expensive wax. I sat on the edge of the obsidian desk, Alexander's old desk, and looked out at the lights of the city. It's a long way down, isn't it? I turned. A woman was standing in the shadows by the bookshelves. She was older, wearing a black lace gown that looked like a shroud. Her silver hair was pinned back with a crown of diamonds. Eleanor Blackwood. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I didn't move. I stayed on the desk, my chin tilted up. "I thought you were in Connecticut, Eleanor." "I was granted a temporary release for the gala," she said, her voice like ice over stone. "A gesture of goodwill from the board. Or perhaps just a final chance to see the ruin you've made of my son." "I haven't ruined him," I said, my voice steady. "I've freed him." "Free," Eleanor laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Alexander was born to be a steward. He was built for the room. Now look at him. He's a consultant. He's a shadow in his own house. You've taken his name, his company, and his pride. And you call that love." "I took the name because it was a weapon," I countered, standing up. "I took the company because it was built on a lie, and as for his pride, he's never been more proud than he is tonight." Eleanor stepped into the light. Her face was a map of resentment. "You think you're equals because you share a bed and a bank account, but a Blackwood always needs a master, Maya. If it's not me, it's you. You've just traded one cage for another." "No," a voice boomed from the doorway. Alexander was there. He didn't look like a shadow. He looked like the most powerful man in the world, precisely because he didn't need the title to prove it. He walked into the room and stood beside me, his arm wrapping around my waist. "The only cage in this story was the one you built, Mother," Alexander said, his eyes fixed on hers. "You taught me that to love was to own. You taught me that everyone had a price. But Maya, she taught me that the only thing worth having is the thing you're willing to lose." He looked at me, and the love in his gaze was so raw it made me catch my breath. "I'm not her servant, Eleanor. I'm her partner. And the ground we stand on is finally level." Eleanor looked at us, at our joined hands, at the way we stood as a single, unbreakable unit. For the first time, I saw the mask of the queen flicker. I saw the loneliness beneath the power. "You're fools," she whispered. "The world will eat you alive." "Let it try," I said. "We're the ones who wrote the map." Eleanor turned and vanished into the shadows of the library. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of the fallout. It was the silence of a final, permanent closure. Alexander POV. We left the gala early. The press were still shouting, the music was still playing, but we had done what we came to do. We had drawn the line. We had shown the world that the Sterling Blackwood era was a partnership of equals. The ride up the private elevator was different tonight. We didn't stand in opposite corners. We stood in the center, our bodies flush, the air thick with the heat of the victory and the hunger of the night. "You were incredible with her," Maya whispered, her hands finding the lapels of my tuxedo. "I thought you might. I thought the old Alexander might come back." "The old Alexander died on that mountain, Maya," I said, pulling her closer. "The man standing here doesn't want to own anything, except maybe the next hour of your time." "Is that a request, Mr. Consultant?" "It's a demand," I growled, my mouth finding the sensitive skin of her neck. The elevator hit the penthouse. The doors opened, but we didn't step out. I pinned her against the wood paneling, my hands sliding down to her hips, pulling the gold silk upward. "Equal ground," she gasped into the kiss. "In every way," I promised. The intimacy that followed was a celebration of our new reality. In the bedroom, with the city lights shimmering like a fallen galaxy outside the window, we stripped away the last of the titles. There was no CEO. There was no Titan. There were only two people who had fought through hell to find their way to each other. Alexander moved with a reverence that matched Maya's strength. He met her fire with his own, a slow, deep, and absolute fusion of two souls. In the dark, surrounded by the silence of the room we had finally made our own, we crossed the final line. We weren't locked in by a contract or a debt. We were locked in by the choice to be whole. Maya POV 4:00 a.m. I lay in the quiet, watching the first hint of dawn touch the skyscrapers. Alexander was asleep beside me, his hand resting on my hip. He looked peaceful, the tension of the last decade finally erased from his face. I looked at the Vigil of Justice notebook on the nightstand. I reached out and pulled it toward me. I opened it to the very last page. Under Alexander's entry, "The woman who owns him," I wrote my own final line, "The man who set her free." I put the notebook back and leaned into Alexander's heat. The fallout was over. The claim was complete. The ground was equal. But as I closed my eyes, I realized that the story of the billionaire and the scientist was no longer about the room. It was about the world we were going to build together. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. Because I knew that no matter what storm came next, I wasn't facing it alone. Alexander POV morning. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of the wind. Maya was standing at the window, a mug in her hand, her gold dress from the night before discarded on the floor. She was wearing one of my shirts again. She looked like the morning. I got out of bed and walked over to her. I didn't say anything. I just wrapped my arms around her from behind and buried my face in her neck. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" she asked softly. "It is," I said, "and you know why." "Why?" "Because for the first time in 34 years, I don't have to check the time." I turned her in my arms, looking into her hazel eyes. "What are we doing today, CEO Sterling?" Maya smiled, a slow, beautiful, and incredibly dangerous smile. "Today," she said, "we're going to change the rules." We walked out of the bedroom, hand in hand. The locked-in era was a memory. The equal ground was our foundation. And as we stepped into our new world, I realized that I had finally achieved the ultimate Blackwood goal. I had secured the only asset that was ever truly worth owning. And her name was Maya. Maya POV, end of chapter 50. The sun rose over Manhattan, a brilliant, unshielded gold. I looked at the ring on my finger. It was just a band of gold, but it was the strongest thing I'd ever seen. I looked at Alexander, and I saw my husband, my partner, and my equal. We were no longer locked in. We were just us, and the world was ours to explore, together. Next chapter, Chapter 51, The Final Deal.